Just give me 1 second. Okay, yes, we're good. Okay, so thanks everyone for coming. This is awesome. This is one of the first events that we've had. And it's nice that we can kind of get everyone from across wherever you are located in the world. I'm Riley. I'm the president of the UWindsor Anthrozoology Club. Although that we're not on campus right now, I'd like to formally acknowledge that the land on which we gather today is traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy of the First Nations, comprised of the Ojibwe, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi peoples. We are grateful to work, learn, and live in this area. I would like to first introduce Rob Gordon. He is the president of the University of Windsor. Dr. Gordon, take it away.
Okay, well, thanks so much, and it's great to be here this evening. To start off, I'd like to thank the individual that introduced me, Riley Fisher, for her incredible leadership in planning the new Anthrozoology Club here at the University of Windsor, and really helping to organize tonight's presentation. As Dr. Daly says, Riley is one of those students. She is pursuing the certificate in anthrozoology with vigor, fully intending to do graduate work in the future, and by all accounts will be a leading scientist in the years to come. Dr. Daly calls her mini-me in part for her unabashed interest in networking and meeting people, a key characteristic that we all know of being an exceptional scholar and scientist. Riley recently attended a conference where she met Peter Singer and Lori Marino, and was so excited that she immediately emailed Dr. Daly from the conference. Riley is now a senior undergraduate student here at the University of Windsor, and started, as she's mentioned already, the Anthrozoology Club a couple of months ago. And she also, as we said, organized tonight's amazing speaker. In a word, Riley is a crackerjack. So thanks so much, Riley, for your leadership on this. It's also my pleasure to recognize Dr. Lori Marino, who you'll be getting a formal introduction of in a few minutes, who is a huge name in the animal rights area. Her work is in fighting for the personhood for whales. She has published in excess of 150 peer-reviewed research publications throughout her career, and was featured in the documentary Blackfish. She has also played a significant role in raising global awareness of how cruel it is to keep cetaceans in captivity because of their cognitive and emotional awareness and close family ties. And so it's such a thrill to have her here with us tonight virtually. So thanks so much to everyone, and all the best with tonight's seminar. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gordon. And I would like to formally introduce our guest speaker tonight, Dr. Lori Marino. Dr. Gordon briefly touched on just how amazing she is, with over 130 peer-reviewed scientific papers, books, chapters, magazine articles featured in National Geographic. Dr. Marino has spent her life's work fighting for and making sure that we all become more aware and of non-human animal issues, and specifics, cetaceans and whales. She has co-authored a groundbreaking study offering the first conclusive evidence for mere self-recognition in bottlenose dolphins, after which she decided to further research with captive animals. So Dr. Marino is actually starting a whale sanctuary in Nova Scotia. So that's in our home country, which is very, very exciting. And Dr. Marino is going to go and give us more details about that. So thank you so much, Dr. Marino, again, for joining us tonight. It means the world.
Well, thank you, Riley. Thank you, Rob Gordon. Thank you, Beth. And thank you, everyone, for being here. I very much appreciate you inviting me, and I'm looking forward to speaking with you as well as answering your questions. So I'm going to get started by sharing my screen. Let's see. Okay. Try that again. Can you all see that?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Terrific. That's good to know. Well, again, thank you very much for having me. Very much appreciate this invitation. Wish I could be there with you in person, but maybe someday. Today I wanted to talk to you about the Whale Sanctuary Project and everything that's led up to what Riley talked about, which is the fact that we're going to be creating a whale sanctuary in Nova Scotia, so right next door. And again, want to thank Riley and Rob Gordon and Beth for the invitation and the introduction. So let's get started. Today, I want to talk with you about who whales and dolphins are, and then really get into this whole notion of cetacean captivity and sort of put it on a timeline. So cetacean captivity, where we are right now, but more interestingly, where we're going. So let's start with a little introduction, a brief introduction to who are whales and dolphins. And I always start with this guy. This is pachycetus. This is the earliest known cetacean, an ancestor, a land ancestor of dolphins and whales, who lived about 55 million years ago. And you can see he really didn't look much like what we know of as dolphins and whales, but this was the animal that we know from the fossil record to start the journey from being a land animal to a fully aquatic animal. And that evolution of cetaceans has been one of the great pleasures of my life to study, because it is an incredible story of transitions from being a land animal to an aquatic animal to also not just an aquatic animal, but one of the most intelligent and complex aquatic animals or animals on the planet. So this is a very brief timeline of the evolution of cetaceans, dolphins, whales, and porpoises, starting with this fellow, pachycetus, that we know of as the first whale, and going through some interesting transitional forms. This is ambulocetus. After about 10 million years, we have fossil records of transitional whales who could walk on land, but also could swim in the ocean. And it's not until you get to about 35 million years ago that you start to see early forms of modern species who just lived in the ocean. They were not able to walk on land anymore. And you can see they're losing their hind limbs, they have flippers, their tails have changed. There are a lot of changes that occurred. The biggest change that occurred after 35 million years ago was the fact that their brains became enormously large. And so they became very, very encephalized. And I'll tell you more about that. But about 20 million years ago, you see fossil dolphins that look like this. And present dolphins, whales, and porpoises have been around for about 10 to 15 million years. So this is a very interesting fossil record. And this is the modern cetacean diversity that we have today. We actually have two suborders, the odontoceti, or toothed whales, dolphins and porpoises, that you see up top, and the mysticeti, the large baleen whales. And there are actually about 76 species of odontoceti. Some of these you might recognize, the beluga whale, the bottlenose dolphin, the sperm whale, but there's actually 6 different families. This is the river dolphin, the pink dolphin. These are the enigmatic beaked whales. These are porpoises. So there's a great variety, but we really only know much about maybe a handful of species. Now, today I'm going to focus on two species, orcas and belugas. So orcas are members of the Delphinidae, the dolphin family. In fact, orcas are the largest dolphin, and they are actually dolphins. They're also known as killer whales, but I like to refer to them as orcas. And then you have beluga whales. And belugas come from a different family, the family Monodontidae. And the only other species in that family is the narwhal. And the beluga is considered the canary of the sea. And the reason is because these animals are incredibly communicative. They make all kinds of sounds, and they're just chirping and whistling and have all kinds of different ways of making sound. Very, very complex. So they've earned that name. Now, when you look at the brains of these animals, which I've been doing for the past 30 years, this is really what got me hooked. Because when I was a graduate student, I was working with someone who was studying primates, particularly chimpanzees. And I happened to be looking through a book, and I saw the brain of a bottlenose dolphin in that book. And I thought, wow, not only is that brain big, but it is really different looking than primate brains. And that started me on the road to studying these brains up to now. And it's really intriguing. Let me point out some of the aspects of cetacean brains that are so intriguing. We could do a whole other lecture on this where we look inside the brains. But let me make some comparisons for you. This is the human brain. And it is a large brain for our body. It's about 7 times the size you would expect for an animal of our body size. And that means its encephalization quotient is 7. But if you look at the orca brain and the beluga brain, for example, you find something really extraordinary. Both of these brains are also larger than you'd expect for their body size. So the orca brain is a lot larger, more massive than the human brain, but you might say, well, their body is more massive. But even taking into account their body size, this brain, this orca brain, beluga brain, is actually over twice as large as you would expect for their body size. So that means that for some reason there was an evolutionary drive to increase the amount of brain tissue in their past. Now, if you look at these brains, you can see that they're very wrinkled on the surface. Those wrinkles tell you something. Those wrinkles tell you about how much neocortex is in the brain. And for those of you brain nerds out there, you know that neocortex is the part of the brain that's principally responsible for thinking, intelligence, awareness, problem solving, analytics, planning. So when we talk about the human brain, we talk about how wrinkled it is and how gyrified it is and how much surface area there is. And that's certainly the case. But when you look at the orca brain and the beluga brain, you find that these brains are actually even more gyrified. There's even more wrinkles. So there's even more neocortex stuffed into that brain, that skull, than in the human brain. And in fact, if you want to find the brain that has the most neocortex on the planet, compared with the size of the whole brain, you have to come here to the orca. This is the most corticalized brain on the planet. So if we're going to put stock in brains, relative brain size, relative proportions of parts of the brain that are involved with intelligence, like the neocortex, The orca brain is right up there. The orca brain has more neocortex proportionally than even we do. What does that mean? Well, I can only say that it means that they're very complex and intelligent. But of course, how that intelligence plays out is also an important question. So let's take a look at how those big brains underlie some of their behavior in the wild, because it's really important to understand their behavior in the wild in order to understand what happens to them when they're actually in captivity. Orcas and belugas, as well as many other dolphins and whales, live in very complex networks. So when you're out there and you might see a bunch of dolphins or a bunch of orcas, it's not just a collection or a group. They may be a family, they may be a pod, they may be a hierarchical community. There are many, many different levels and many different social roles that each individual plays. So it's a very, very complex system. And you only really can discover it if you're studying them in the wild for many, many years. What are some of the things we know about both beluga whales and orcas? Well, they're cultural, highly cultural. They have cultural traditions, behaviors learned and passed on from one generation to the next. It's usually, the cultural innovations usually are made by adult females who then pass on different ways of doing things to their children. Some of the cultural traditions that these animals have are dialects. So just as we have different dialects and languages, different communities of belugas, different communities of orcas have the same thing. They have different ways of foraging, different ways of eating. Some orcas eat only salmon, others eat seals, others eat stingrays, and it's all learned. It's not anything that's sort of built in genetically. And there's all different ways that they show that each community is actually a culture. And that's really important. They have really long juvenile periods, many, many years, just like we do. And they need that in order to learn their culture and learn how to survive and be a proper orca or beluga whale. They have lifelong social bonds. And those social bonds are extremely important. Their emotional bonds or ties to each other are incredibly strong. Another thing we know about these species, which we learned in the past few years, is that they share with us the fact that they have menopause. So both belugas and orcas are matrilineal. Groups are actually composed of an older female, a matriarch, who calls the shots in the group and basically guides the group as they navigate through their lives. But once they get to a certain age, then they enter a post-reproductive phase, menopause, where the older matriarchs now stop having children of their own. And what do? They spend their time helping their grandchildren and their children live their lives. So it's very much the way elders in human societies, the role that they take on. They live in very complex social networks, and their communication abilities are so sophisticated that, again, we could do a whole semester course on the kinds of sounds they make, what they mean. But what we do know is that a lot of the whistle sounds that they make have some shared characteristic with human vocalizations. For instance, they have a signature or identity whistles that act like names. The calves, when they're first born and they're learning their dialect, they babble. Things like that. So their lives are not completely alien to us. We can really relate to a lot of their aspects, the aspects of their social lives. So with that, and that's just a very short way of going through who these animals are, I want to now take a look at captivity and the state of the situation right now for belugas, orcas, and other cetaceans in captivity. Let's look at captivity by the numbers. There are still over 3,000 whales, dolphins, and porpoises, representing about 10 different species and hybrids held in captivity, mainly in concrete tanks, some in small pens around the world, mainly for entertainment and display, some for use in research, and so forth. Now, in North America alone, there are 481 bottlenose dolphins who are kept on display in concrete tanks and sea pens, 80 beluga whales, 22 orcas, and other species. And in Canada, where we're talking about, there are 5 bottlenose dolphins, 1 orca, Kiska, and 50 plus belugas, all at Marineland, Canada. And there's only 1 dolphin left at the Vancouver Aquarium, and that's a little white-sided dolphin, and she will be probably going to another facility in the United States because she's all alone. So Marineland, Canada really has the majority. And again, as I mentioned, there are over 50 belugas there and 1 orca. So what's so bad about the fact that these animals are being kept in concrete tanks? I mean, when you think about it, they get food, they have no predators, their water is filtered, they have 24/7 veterinary care. They should be doing really, really well. They should be living long, healthy lives. In fact, nothing could be farther from the truth. It's actually quite the opposite. The impacts of living in concrete tanks for orcas, beluga whales, and other cetaceans are nothing short of devastating. Let me tell you a little bit about what the science tells us about what happens to these animals when they are forced to live in marine parks. First, they suffer from systemic illness and opportunistic infections. Most of them die of pneumonia and other infectious lung diseases, but they also get gastric ulcers and other stomach diseases, candidiasis, which is a fungal infection, encephalitis, and many more. But they fall prey to opportunistic infections, which, as you'll see, is a result of chronic stress. They also show common signs of mental illness, the kinds of signs that we see in humans and other mammals who are mentally disturbed, emotionally disturbed. These kinds of things are, for instance, behavioral stereotypies, so endless circling, endless, moving of the head. You've seen elephants in zoos that rock back and forth. That's a stereotypy. When you see that kind of overly repetitive motion, it tells you that there's something wrong. It's a sign of mental disturbance. They also self-mutilate. And I'll show you an example of the fact that most orcas in tanks grate their teeth along the hard parts of the tank and damage their teeth down to nubs. Many of them bang their head against the sides of the tank or try to jump out of the tank. A lot of self-mutilation. And they show depressive behaviors, anorexia, going off feed, logging, meaning just staying on the surface of the tank and not staying immobile, not doing anything, losing motivation to do anything. And they also exhibit very disturbed social interactions. And this is important because You know, a lot of people think, well, if there are several orcas together in a tank with several dolphins, that makes a community or a culture or a net or a family, but it really doesn't, because they're really just thrown in together without any cultural traditions, without any history. Sometimes different kinds of whales and dolphins are thrown together, and it doesn't always end up working out. There's a lot of hyper-aggression towards other orcas and other whales, and including humans. And what you see at the bottom here is an orca who was at SeaWorld San Diego with a very, very, very severe jaw injury that was incurred. These kinds of hyper-aggressive events, the killing of each other, the killing of trainers, and things of that nature, just don't happen in the ocean because there's room to disperse, and they make up their own natural social groups. They have choice in the matter. We also see a lot of poor parenting, failure to attach and thrive in the children, in the calves. Here's an example of a study that was done a couple of years ago, looking at the type of tooth damage that captive orcas show. You can see an example here of tooth wear in captive orcas, and these teeth are worn down to the gum. It turns out that if you look across all captive orcas and all of the SeaWorld's facilities, they all have tooth damage. It's present in all of them. And in over 60%, there's moderate to severe tooth damage. So this is a result of the repetitive grating of their teeth on the gates because of the stress of living in a tank. Earlier this year, my colleagues and I got together and we took a look at and analyzed the effects of captivity on orcas and looked at it within the context of a model of chronic stress, well known for mammals. And what we found was that the things that we're seeing in orcas who are kept in tanks fit this model of chronic stress and the effects of chronic stress on the brain, the body, behavior. We also identified 5 major sources of chronic stress for orcas living in tanks. They are physical confinement, lack of social support, noise, loss of autonomy, meaning the loss of the ability to make choices about who you're with and how you spend your day. Think about that big brain. That big brain is very complex, and it's the brain of an animal who wants to have choice and challenge and stimulation. And they get none of that in the tanks. And boredom. Boredom is one of the most insidious forms of chronic stress. So all of these things come together to produce a cascade of effects that eventually lead to a worn out immune system, a brain that has Vince changes probably, and what results is the fact that we get these vulnerabilities to infectious disease. And the bottom line for all this is these animals live short lives and unhealthy lives. There's variability, of course. There are some orcas who have lived for a long time in the tanks, but most don't. And so you can't look at the outliers, you have to look at the average. The maximum lifespan for free-ranging orca could be 60 to 70 for a male, 80 to 90 for a female. I met a matriarch of the southern resident orca community a few years ago. Her name was Granny. She was considered to be 100 to 105 years old. So when you think about that, that's with all of the challenges of living in pollution, loss of prey, disease, all of that, and still many of them live long lives. But most captive orcas do not live past age 20. So think about that. They don't even make it into their 20s, and that's with all the food in the world, all the veterinary care. With belugas, it's the same story. In the ocean, they can live as long as 50, 60 years, but most of them die before the age of 30. When you put this all together, what this says is that there's a fundamental incompatibility between who these animals are, what they need to thrive, what they need to be healthy, and what's on offer at a marine park, what can be provided to them. This is not about trying to be mean to these animals or marine parks not caring. It's about the simple fact that because of their adaptive history, their evolution, their big complex brains, what they need, it cannot be provided to them in a concrete tank like the ones you see here. Now, fortunately, there's been, over the past 10 years, I'd say, a major change in public opinion about keeping these animals on display and for entertainment purposes. Unfortunately, it started with a tragic event 10 years ago in 2010 when a captive orca at SeaWorld Orlando fatally attacked his trainer, Don Branchow. And that's still come right here. And as unfortunate and sad as that incident was, it opened people's eyes to what was going on, what's going on in these tanks, in these marine parks. Why would Tilikum kill his trainer? In fact, he killed 2 other people before that. And so everything just kind of got blown open. And what happened was, a few years later, in 2013, a film came out that really showed what's going on behind the scenes, and that was Blackfish. And I was quite honored to be part of that film. So we started to see public opinion really shift in 2013. By 2016, I had founded the Whale Sanctuary Project along with other members of our team that I'll tell you about in a minute. And in 2017, the Vancouver Park Board voted in favor of preventing new whales and dolphins from being kept on display at the Vancouver Aquarium. So there's only 2 places in Canada, Marineland Canada and the Vancouver Aquarium, that have cetaceans in captivity. And the Vancouver Aquarium does tremendous field work. They're really getting out of the business of displaying these animals for entertainment purposes. So that's terrific. So the only remaining park is really Marineland Canada. Now, some of you, or all of you, as Canadians, might know about this tremendous event that happened last year, and that is the passing of Canadian Bill S-203 in Canada. And this bill, started by Wilfrid Moore, who was a senator, is historic because it ends the captivity of whales and dolphins in Canada. It amends the Criminal Code, the Fisheries Act, and regulation of the Trade Act, and bans the keeping, breeding, and trading in cetaceans for entertainment purposes. So this makes it criminal to put animals on display just for entertainment, to bring them in or bring them into the country and to breed them. However, there is a loophole, and this is that all of the dolphins and whales currently in the tanks now in Canada are grandfathered in. But this is a tremendous victory for Canadians, and it puts you way ahead of the United States. And that's where the Whale Sanctuary Project comes in, because following the lead of these enormous progressive changes that have occurred in Canada, we started to look along the Nova Scotia shore for a site for a permanent sanctuary. We also looked on the West Coast as well. But last February, or rather this past February, 2020, we held a press conference in Halifax, and were able to announce that after 2.5 years of searching for a perfect site, we found one on the eastern shore of Nova Scotia in Port Hilton. And that is where we will be creating a sanctuary for retired whales, retired from entertainment parks and aquariums. So that brings me to into the future, cetacean captivity, where we're going. This whale sanctuary project mission is to establish a model gold standard seaside sanctuary where captive whales from entertainment can live in an environment that maximizes their well-being, their economy, and is as close as possible to their natural habitat. Now, it is still captivity, but the difference is that in a sanctuary, the priority is given to the well-being of the animals, and the habitat is more natural. It's the actual ocean. I'll tell you a little bit more about what that means. Soon after we started, we founded Cetacean. We brought on board our executive director, Charles Vinnick, who is known for his work with the Cousteau family, and was also project manager for the PICO, or Free Willy project that occurred a few years ago. So we were very, very fortunate that Charles wanted to take over the role of executive director. We also have a distinguished board of directors, staff, and over 58 advisors, many of them in Canada, who all have the expertise to make this happen. And this is kind of, what I did in the beginning was just sort of look around and say, who needs to be on this team to make a whale sanctuary? And that's who we have. We have what I commonly refer to as the dream team. So what is a sanctuary? Well, a lot of places say they're sanctuaries, but they're really not. And here's some ways of distinguishing between an authentic sanctuary and a place that actually is just a zoo. First of all, an authentic sanctuary is a place where the animals thrive, or they have the opportunity to thrive, not just live. It's not enough to just give them enough food and water. In an authentic sanctuary, everything is motivated towards providing an opportunity for each individual resident to thrive. There are no performances, no breeding, and no unnecessary invasive procedures. There is promotion of autonomy, exploration, and a life as close as possible to nature. But at the same time, because these animals don't have survival skills, they cannot simply be reintroduced into the open ocean. They need to be cared for. So they will have lifetime care, top-notch veterinary care for them. But it will all be within a natural environment. And on the human side, we will be doing authentic education, conservation, and share what we learn and be entirely transparent about what is going on in the sanctuary. So just to give you a sense of the location of this is Nova Scotia, and here's Halifax, the largest town. And if you go about 2 hours east of Halifax, you get to Port Hilford, Nova Scotia, and a nearby town called Sherbrooke. And that is the site of the first North American permanent sanctuary for dolphins and whales to be created. And here it is. So this is Port Hilford, Nova Scotia. It's from a drone. It's the site of the first sanctuary for belugas and orcas in North America. And as you can see, this is just a beautiful, big, expansive bay. It's protected from storms. It has a lot of great features. And I'll tell you a little bit more about the specifics of it. So what are the characteristics of the sanctuary in Port Hilford? It's an expansive bay. It's got a lot of depth and different types of depth so that the animals can explore and dive. In tanks, they can't really do that. It's all kind of a uniform cement surface. Here they will have a natural bottom, a natural seaside environment. It will be a netted off area of at least 100 acres or more, which is about 300 times larger than the largest performance tank anywhere in the world. It's not enough compared with a free-ranging life, a life in the wild. Is it qualitatively better than being in a tank? You bet. They'll have a natural sandy bottom with fish and other animals that can move in and out of the sanctuary space. And we are planning on having 6 to 10 beluga whales, and perhaps, if we're able to, 3 to 4 orcas. And of course, they would be separated in different parts of the sanctuary. Right now, we're focusing on beluga whales because there are so many more of them in captivity in North America and around the world. There will be a hiking trail for long distance viewing, but no one will be able to come in and pay a ticket and be able to pet or feed them. The public will be able to view them from a distance. There'll be a really great interpretive center right on site. We'll have security, of course, veterinary care, and 24/7 live stream. So we'll have underwater cameras, underwater hydrophones, so that we can live stream the behaviors of the whales into classrooms, museums, people's living rooms, anything you want. People will be able to see what beluga whales or orcas do when they're given the opportunity to be in a natural environment and to do what they want to do. And that will be part of a whole education and outreach project. So the bottom line is that the time really has come now to see whales in concrete tanks as part of our past. We used to think that was a good idea. We've learned now through the science that it's not good for them. It's just something that we want to put in the past. So according to Jean-Michel Cousteau, who is one of our advisors, he says, let's end the show now and retire these intelligent, social, complex animals to seaside sanctuaries. So I want to thank you for listening, and I look forward to your questions and discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Marino.
I think I've stopped sharing, so.
Yes, I think so
okay.
as well. I'm taking you off the spotlight.
Okay.
I'm going to open up the, I'm going to unmute. If you feel comfortable with asking your question, then you will have the opportunity to unmute yourself. Just give me 1 second, unless you wanted to write your question in the chat, and then I can parlay it over. But Dr. Haley has her hand up.
Thank you so much, Dr. Marino. It's so exciting to see you in this role and to know that this is going on under your leadership. One thing I always like to make clear, and maybe I would like you just to elaborate on this a little bit, the relationship between brain size and orcas and their complex levels of intelligence. You're not talking just about intelligence. I mean, I always am very careful when, I take the Peter Singer approach that, it's sentience that matters, not intelligence. So when we're talking about intelligence with orcas, it's mostly, if I understand you correctly, it's because they're so aware. It's more of a metacognitive approach, isn't it? That they're so aware of their suffering. I know I sound a bit philosophical, but what I'm saying is it's not just that they're intelligent, it's the way that they're intelligent. Can you elaborate? I think you probably understand what I'm saying, that the sentience is somehow connected to their awareness, isn't it?
Sure. I mean, when I talk about intelligence, I'm really talking about cognitive wherewithal, meaning just the total sum of the mind, if you will. That includes sentience. It includes the ability to analyze things and problem solve. It includes feeling, motivation, awareness. So all of that. The neocortex is, the part of the mammalian brain, as you know, that is very highly involved in kind of analytical intelligence, sensory processing, perception, those kinds of things. But the whole brain is large and complex, just as the human brain is. And just as in the human brain, we have emotions, we have motivations, we have self-awareness, coordination of our body, sensory perception. All of that goes into what I would consider to be the cognitive complexity of any animal, including orcas. I hope that helps a little bit.
Yes, it was. It always worries me when there's because something or someone is more intelligent. We hear this with pigs. I don't eat meat. I don't eat pork because pigs are so smart. And, so that really isn't relevant. And I always try and point that case out. And so I appreciate that elaboration. Thank you.
I would point out, however, just to elaborate a little on that it's not that intelligence is unimportant, because what we see in dolphins and whales is that their complexity and their intelligence is something that makes them particularly vulnerable to living in a tank, because their needs are so many and complex. You look at that brain, that's a brain that's not going to be satisfied swimming in circles in a tank with no stimulation, no challenges. So it's not that intelligence is unimportant. It comes into play, but it's not the only thing by any means.
Great. So Tammy is one of our anthrozoology members. She also has her hand up next. So Tammy, you can either ask your question via microphone or you can write it in the chat.
Hello. I just wanted to thank you for speaking, and I just wanted to really thank you for your work and for starting this sanctuary. Nothing could make me happier. I mean, ever since I was a little kid going to the parks, it made me sad. It never made me happy to see them. It always made me very sad to see these very smart creatures. And then I did have the pleasure, my husband and I had the pleasure of seeing orcas in BC. We went whale watching. And we got to watch a mother and son hunt a seal, and they caught the seal right under our boat and killed it. So we were able to smell the inside of seal, which is like cucumber, we learned. And it was one of the most amazing experiences to have them stay around our boat for so long because the seal was hiding under our boat. And I would love to visit your sanctuary, and I will definitely be walking by it in the future.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That's a rare opportunity you had to really see a mother and her child hunting together. And, when you look at something like that, there's a lot of teaching that goes on there. That young male orca is learning an awful lot from his mother that he's going to carry with him as he gets older.
Yes, it was unbelievable.
And our next question is from Chelsea. Chelsea is an executive member on the Anthrozoology Club. So Chelsea, take it away.
Great, thank you. Yeah, not to sound repetitive, but thank you so much for your work. This kind of stuff makes all the animal lovers and advocates on here as happy as can be, really, that we're moving forward and not backwards. So again, thank you so much. I just have a question in regards to the sanctuary. So you said that you had, was it 100 or 300 acres of ocean, and that you dedicated more of it to your belugas than your orcas, because the population of the belugas coming in were a lot bigger than the orcas. Does the acres get smaller and smaller? Because I know with male and female, you'd have to divide in order to stop them from procreating. And throwing in orcas into the mix, you'd have to divide them by gender as well. So do each of them get 100 acres each, or how does that kind of work?
That's a good question. And actually, you know, these are the kinds of questions we ask ourselves as we go forward and decide exactly on the number of animals and the mix or combination. So there won't be any breeding, but we're not going to separate males and females. The females will be on birth control.
Okay,
so
that works.
And the reason for that, I mean, we prefer not to separate them because, as you mentioned, you know, all kinds of things happen when you separate the males and females, and it's not as natural a life as it would be if they can have normal relations, but just not, you know, reproduce. So that's
I didn't realize that there was birth control for whales and porpoises.
There is. I mean, the SeaWorld places like that, they have these animals on birth control all the time, and a lot of the reproduction that goes on is artificial insemination. It's totally controlled that way. But so we don't want to, you know, do a lot of separating, and what we're hoping is to bring in whales who know each other, maybe a mother and a child, so that they start to form their own natural social groups, and we don't have to separate them. Now, we can separate them if need be, but we prefer not to. In terms of orcas, that would come later, and I think that, you know, there's, you know, we'll concentrate on belugas, and then if we saw that we had the opportunity to have a couple of orcas who came to live with us, then we might increase the size of the facility. We certainly have a goal in mind of making sure that we don't exceed the carrying capacity of that bay, and making sure that every individual resident has a lot more room than they normally would in a tank. So even though we probably could take even more individuals, we don't want to, because we want them to have the space that they need.
That's wonderful. That's the things you know. And I just want to follow that question up with, now I'm a little bit ignorant on the matter. Is there like a high season, kind of like with elks per se, where the males become over sexually dominant, whether they're neutered per se or not, and start fighting during a certain season, or does that not happen?
It's a little bit more complicated than that. One of the things, though, is that if you have the males together and they're separated from the females, but they know the females are there, it's probably the worst situation, because they start to get really aggressive because they fight and they're frustrated and they can't be with the females. So that's another reason why, you know, we want to be cautious about making sure that the sanctuary is a place that doesn't increase stress, it decreases stress. So we would, you know, need to be very careful. And there will be a lot of vetting of the individuals who come into the sanctuary in terms of their health, their personality, their history, and so forth. So we can at least maximize the chances that all of the sanctuary residents will form a group that gets along, and their own culture in a sense.
Thank you so much for taking the time to answer my question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so the next comment is actually from the comment section. Dr. Gordon says, thanks so much, Dr. Marino. I really enjoyed the presentation. I've just written down Port Hilford, Nova Scotia as a future destination. My question is, how will you coordinate feeding at the sanctuary?
Great question. And I understand, Rob Gordon, you are from Nova Scotia, so we expect to see you there. The feeding,
Yes.
well, we're going to have feeding on site, obviously, and we will be feeding them frozen thawed fish. Why? Because that's all they know as food. That's what they've been fed in the tanks and the marine parks. And they don't even know that a live fish is food, is prey. And so we want to make sure that they're nourished, that they get what they need and what they recognize as food. And we will feed them in different ways. If they start to go after fish, live fish that are in the sanctuary, obviously we won't stop them. That would be a good sign that they're exploring, that they may be learning something, and but we won't depend upon that for their nourishment. I hope that helps.
Great question, Dr. Gordon. Our next one is a hands up from one of our executive members, Adrian. And Adrian, feel free to turn on your mic if you'd like.
Hello, Dr. Marino. Thank you, Riley, for introducing me. So my question was with regards to the enclosure. I don't know if that's the term you would use for it, but so what I understand is it's a netting around the 100-acre area. And I looked it up a little bit while we were talking, but there have been orcas, wild orcas, spotted around Nova Scotia. So in that area in general, what would you do if you had interactions of wild orcas coming towards the captive orcas that you have? And in that case, if you saw that it was causing stress to your captive orcas, or if they started to test the barrier that's keeping them from the wild, how does that interaction work out for you?
That's a great question. And yeah, when you're in the ocean, other animals live there, and they may come by and be curious or attracted to the whales in the sanctuary. Now, one of the things we've done is we've consulted with a lot of scientists and conservationists in Nova Scotia and in the Maritimes, and the chances of an orca coming into that part of the shore and the bay are minuscule. There have been orcas around Nova Scotia, but not in that area. So it would be very unusual. More likely, but still rare, would be the lone sociable beluga whale. And they show up from time to time. They may try to come into the bay and be attracted by the beluga whales who are there. And we are taking special care to think about mitigation measures, to think about, what we would do if something like that happened. We're going to have surveillance, so we'll know if a whale comes into the bay. And we will have protocols that will allow us to be prepared to deal with that. We may have a double net in some areas, or we may, we're thinking about that. That's a fascinating question. And we have to be prepared just in case something rare like that happens. And of course, we'll have 24/7 security. So if there's any whales, seals, or any other large animals who come into the bay, we'll know it. And it's our responsibility to be prepared for that.
Thank you.
Our next person is, I believe it's a colleague of Dr. Daly's, Lee Zasloff.
Can you hear me?
Loud.
Yes.
You can hear me? Okay. So thank you so much for that great presentation and the fantastic work you're doing. evolution is not my area, but I am just astounded that these are animals who went from land into the sea. I've never heard of any animal evolving from land to sea. Could you comment on that?
I mean, it's a fascinating story. It's one of the best, if not the best, fossil records that we have to tell the evolution story. The ancestor of the dolphins and whales that I showed you, that wolf-like creature, pachycetus, that made the transition, that animal is actually related to hoofed animals, cows, horses, pigs. And so this was a hoofed animal that for some reason decided to adopt a semi-aquatic lifestyle and then fully aquatic lifestyle. Why? I don't think we'll ever know, right? Something could have chased them into the water, or something could have enticed them into the water, a new prey item, or a combination of those things. But for some reason, once they adopted an aquatic lifestyle, over about 10 or 15 million years, they just went on the path of becoming fully aquatic so that they couldn't go back on land again, and they thrived there. But it's a fascinating story. If you look at the fossils, you see all the transitional changes that occur from one stage to the next. It's a beautiful example of evolution.
That's amazing. And I have another question about communication. So I'm wondering if the sounds, any of the communication sounds that any of the whales make, are those associated with anything that would be the equivalent of Broca's area in the brain?
Oh my gosh, that's so interesting. So Broca's area in the brain is the speech area in the human brain, and it sits on in the temporal lobe. And so it's the area that, if it's damaged, you lose the ability to form speech. You can still understand speech, but you lose the ability to produce speech.
Actually, that's Wernicke's area.
Well, Wernicke's is understanding. Wernicke's is understanding speech. Broca's is producing speech.
Producing speech, yeah.
Yeah. Yes. And both of them are in the temporal lobe of the human. We don't know if there is an analogous region of their brain that produces. Obviously, there has to be something, some vocalization center. What we do know is that, and we found this out about 5 years ago when we did a study, looking at fibers that go from the ear to the brain in a post-mortem brain, that the ear, the acoustic information goes to that part of the temporal lobe, as well as to another part of the brain. So to make it simple, just to say, they have two ascending auditory regions. We have one, and one of theirs goes to the temporal lobe. And it's tempting to think that maybe one of those has to do with their vocalizations and whistles, and the other has to do with their location. We don't know. It's a very complex, interesting picture.
Is it only on the left or on
no,
both?
it's both
sides. Yeah. And then, and the last thing is, how is their communication affected in captivity?
Well, their communication is severely affected because they don't have any reason really to communicate. They're all right there. They have no reason to have long distance calls or anything of that nature. They often reduce their echolocation because there's nothing to really explore or echolocate on. So it really damps down their whole communication because there's very little to really communicate about, to be honest.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much for asking that, Lee. That was very interesting. Very good question.
Yes.
Our next one, actually, it's Tammy again. She has another comment or question that she'd like to make.
Hello, I'm actually glad it comes after Lee's question because I want to know your opinion on how and if the communication barrier will ever be breached. Do you think that we will crack the code and be able to actually communicate in the form of asking questions? And then I second want to know if you think Kiska will ever be set free.
Oh boy. Well, first of all, I don't know is the answer about cracking the code. And the reason I don't know is because there's so many elements of vocalization sounds produced by dolphins and whales that really we don't know whether or not, we don't put it this way, there are so many different layers to their sounds. And first we need to understand what is important to them. So, for instance, we do know that certain sounds go with certain behaviors. But apart from that, there's a lot of sound that they make that doesn't necessarily go with a behavior that you can observe. And we also don't know what dimensions of sound they use to communicate meaning. Is it frequency? Is frequency compressed? Is it amplitude and frequency? Is it, what constitutes a different signal or a similar signal to them? So it's a very complex problem to deal with. And there's no Rosetta Stone for that. I don't know if we will ever be able to have a conversation that you're talking about, like, hi, how is your day? How's your child? And have them answer in a way that we can understand that. That would be the dream. I don't know if we can do that. The question is, are we smart enough to figure that out? I don't know. As far as Kiska, Kiska is a orca who's alone in a tank at Marineland, Canada. Will she ever be released to a sanctuary? If anybody from Marineland, Canada is listening right now, you know that we have for a couple of years now, we would like to talk to you about Kiska and the possibility of having Kiska working with you to have Kiska in our sanctuary. It would be the kind of thing where we would have to do it together because you know Kiska the best. And we stand ready and willing to work with you as soon as you give us the sign.
Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. We have a comment. So this is from Colleen Murray. She says, I've been following this project for some time and I'm so excited to see it almost fully realized. What I have not heard from is any updated response from marine parks. I know SeaWorld has been negative, of course. Do you have any comments on that, Dr. Marino?
Well, I think, right. See, I mean, it's a very difficult thing because we do have to get our whales from a place, right? And we have to work with people who currently have the whales. And what we've already said is this is not about closing these places down. It's about the title of this talk, moving into the future with them together. And so, SeaWorld, Marineland, they know who we are. They know we're here. And they know that we want to talk and have a conversation with them about how we can work together. We don't have any confirmation yet from any, but we're working very hard on that.
Thank you. We have a chat from a newest member. Her name is Haley, and she was just wondering if the birth control has any side effects on them like it does in humans.
Well, yeah, I mean, there can be side effects and this is not something that you would do unless there was direct veterinary supervision, health checkups, a very well considered scientific decision to do something like this. Again, keep in mind that most, or at least some, of the dolphins and whales living in the tanks now are on some kind of hormonal control. They're also on psychoactive drugs like anti-anxiety, anti-depression drugs. So they're on a whole slew of drugs. Our aim would be to have them on the least amount of drugs, certainly not any of the psychoactive drugs. And as far as birth control, you know, we have to weigh the risks with the age and the health of each individual whale. And just like with humans, it's counterindicated in some. With others, it seems to be okay. They have to take breaks from it, just as humans seem to have to. And it would be very well managed. So this is not something we would take lightly, but we do think and we know that other facilities have done so successfully.
Great. Our next question is from Chelsea again. So Chelsea, feel free to take it away. You're still muted, Chelsea.
Stupid computer. Okay, sorry. Thank you, Riley. Yeah, just quickly, if you have, say, a dolphin or porpoise in a place like British Columbia, how do you go about transporting exactly that him or her all the way to Nova Scotia safely in the healthiest manner? Because needing water and being that big must be harder than imaginable, and even putting in a truck in a tank, the temperatures have to be right, the stopping, the slushing. I don't know, how do you do it?
Well, luckily we have people on our team that have done it. Our executive director, Charles Vinnick, as I mentioned, was the manager for the Keiko project, and they brought this orca Keiko from Mexico to Washington, and then to Iceland on planes, trains and automobiles, if you will. And this was all planned out and attended by veterinarians, trainers, and others. We also have couple of very special people on our staff. One of them is Jeff Foster, and he was also in charge of the Keiko transfer. He's the dolphin whisperer. He knows how to do this. He knows how to transfer. He's done it many times because he used to work in the captivity industry, and now he's with us. And he's probably one of the top experts in the world on how to transfer dolphins and whales from one place to another. So I have every confidence that we have the best team to do that, and it's certainly doable. It's done all the time.
Yeah.
And so we certainly feel that we can do so safely.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And I have a question since no one else has popped in any. So Dr. Marino, I've been following your work for quite some time. And I remember before you announced that you selected the Halifax site, that there was a few other sites that were kind of in the contenders. I just wanted to find out why you chose Halifax.
Well, we chose Nova Scotia, not specifically Halifax, but of course, Port Hilford. Yeah, we were looking in British Columbia and also of the Washington State in the United States. And the reason those, and Nova Scotia, and those three locations were our focus because those locations offered the right temperature range, the right kind of topography, to have both orcas and belugas if we wanted to. And we chose Port Hilford, Nova Scotia, for two reasons. One is it has a beautiful, expansive bay. So it has all the physical requirements needed to create a really beautiful sanctuary. But the other element of it, which we didn't appreciate initially, but now we do, is that we have a community of people nearby in Port Hilford and in the Sherbrooke community on the eastern shore of Nova Scotia who have embraced this project, who have now are the people we are working with now to make this a reality. And so it's not just the physical site, it's the community who will have this in their backyard, if you will, and how they embrace and roll up their sleeves and work with us to get this done. And we were very fortunate with Port Hilford and Sherbrooke.
Awesome. Thanks for answering that. We have a comment from Namisha Dubé, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. They say, "Hi, Dr. Marino. I echo the group's gratitude for your time and expertise this evening. I'm a lawyer that has some experience in the area of animal law. I know that you have expressed a desire for personhood and other complex sentient beings. The common argument is that complex intelligent animals such as orcas, dolphins, or chimps are like us and they deserve greater rights and recognition. I'm wondering whether you think this line of reasoning may impact the advancement of welfare for other sentient beings such as farm animals that we have a harder time connecting with. If there are plans to extrapolate this project to other groups of animals, I'd be curious to hear more about that. Thank you."
Thank you for your question. Yes, I've worked with the Non-Human Rights Project for a couple of years directly, and we still work together, collaborate. And that project is aimed at establishing legal personhood for a certain set of complex animals, dolphins and whales, elephants, great apes. And the idea behind this is not necessarily to exclude other animals, because it doesn't, but is to follow a certain logic that allows us to open the door to the notion of other animals having personhood rights, even simple ones like bodily integrity. And that is to say that when you really look at legal personhood, the definition of that is not, a human. It is an individual with certain characteristics, autonomy and self-awareness and social life, et cetera, et cetera. And what we're saying is that if those are the characteristics that define a person, then there are many other species who are persons, including dolphins, whales, and elephants, and great apes, and probably many others. So it's not an exclusion so much as we're trying to use a certain simple logic of analogy to get judges to say, wait a minute, well, if you're a person because you're a self-aware, autonomous being, and this chimpanzee is, I can't deny her personhood, her legal personhood. And so the other issue is if we cannot get legal rights for animals who we all think are really intelligent, like elephants and dolphins and chimpanzees, what are the chances of having a judge decide that a pig or a chicken is a legal person? So we have to go with the low-hanging fruit. There's a certain logic to it, and it most certainly does not mean at all that farmed animals and other animals shouldn't have their rights recognized. They should. But it is a process that will be a long-term process of trying to crack open that possibility for other animals in the best way we can right now.
Thank you for your insight. Carol Turner said, "Excellent question, Namisha." And then I think the last comment that we'll have time for is from Lee again. So Lee, take it away.
Thank you. So you just reminded me of another question I had. How did you find out, I think it was belugas you said earlier, that they have self-awareness, that they recognize themselves?
It was actually bottlenose dolphins that we studied. Well, we did a simple, it wasn't simple, it was a pretty complex long-term project, but we were able to show that the bottlenose dolphins were using the mirror to check out parts of the body. And the way you do that, the way to test that is you put a mark on someone's body that they can't see unless they're in the mirror. And then you look to see whether they use the mirror to touch the mark on their own body. That's called mark-directed behavior. And that's how chimpanzees and elephants have demonstrated mirror self-recognition. It's how little kids do. It's the use of the mirror to check out strange marks on your body. We adapted rather, that procedure for dolphins by, instead of marking them and requiring them to touch marks on the body, they don't have hands, but we did require them to be marked and then go to the mirror and use the mirror to view the marked part of their body. So if they were marked here, they had to go to the mirror and do this. If they were marked here, they had to go to the mirror and do that. If they were marked here, so there had to be a one-to-one correspondence between where they were marked and the part of their body they contorted in front of the mirror to see it. And so we did that under many, many different control conditions in order to ensure that what we thought we were seeing was indeed that. And so that is how you would test mirror self-recognition in an animal who doesn't have hands.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
So if no one else has anything that they'd like to ask Dr. Marino, I'll give it a little bit for anyone to raise their hand. Adrian, go ahead.
I'm just going to jump in with this last one. So I was thinking about how you said that you were trying to make the sanctuary as natural as possible for the whales, but you're going to be doing not hand feeding, but you're going to be doing a controlled feeding for the whales, right? So in the case of a lot of zoos and some aquariums, they always give the phrase that they're containing these animals in terms of research and education. These are important reasons as to why they have these animals. So with your sanctuary, is there going to be any interaction between the individuals who control the sanctuary and the whales in terms of research and education from the animals?
That's a very good question. So obviously there will be human-whale interaction because we have to feed them. We also have to maintain certain husbandry behaviors so that we can do things like examine them to make sure that they're healthy. We'll have veterinarians on the grounds. And so there will have to be a relationship between the whales and the people who are interfacing with them. A trainer maybe who they've known for years, for instance. So you can't eliminate that completely because you still need to monitor them. You need to know how they're doing. In terms of research, yeah, we will be doing research, but it will be as hands-off as possible and also mostly observational. But we will need to, again, know where you need to take the data on who's hanging out with who's in what part of the sanctuary. Are they eating? Are they chasing? Are they exploring? All of these things will have to be observed and reported and then shared with everyone so that we have a good sense of how the behavior changes when they get into a sanctuary. And it's a fascinating idea to think about for the first time in their lives, these individuals will be going from a concrete tank to an ocean environment that's, orders of magnitude larger. And how do their vocalizations change? How does the social behavior change? How does their level of exploration change? How does the use of echolocation change? We need to take data on all of that, and we will. So again, it's not going to be just, drop them in the ocean, have a nice life. It will be a managed situation. Hopefully, from the point of view of the animals, though, it will be a managed situation that resembles a natural situation much more than what they're in now.
So then I just want to jump on to a second question from there in relation to it. But because we've seen like marine land and some zoos and aquariums, again, who have used the phrase research, conservation, education as ways to say these animals need to be here or they should be here, do you think that a sanctuary like yours doing research and getting information on these animals could be seen as a means of negative publicity, or like groups can use it negatively against something like that because we've seen it as a negative thing?
I see what you're saying. And so, first of all, when you really look at how much research and conservation is going on at these places, it's very low. So it's a claim that they make, but with very little evidence to back it up. It's a thing that you say in order to justify keeping animals on display. Because if you say education, if you say conservation, people think, oh, okay, something really important is happening there. And, we wouldn't want to interfere with that. But I've looked at the evidence for those claims, and it's very slim, very slim. Now, there's a lot of differences between different places. Like Vancouver Aquarium, they do a lot of amazing field work. And, they do great education, great research. Other facilities, not so much. But so it really depends. So that's sort of a claim in search of a lot of evidence. But in terms of the sanctuary, we will be doing research, we will be doing education, but it's going to be authentic. And what I mean by that is we're not going to be invested in convincing everyone in the whole world that these animals should be in captivity and are happy. We're going to tell people why they're in a sanctuary, why that's better than a tank, but not as good as living a natural life. We're going to tell people about their histories, about their health, about their behavior. We want people to know these animals. And the most important thing is we're going to have a 24/7 live stream. So people are going to see beluga whales being beluga whales, not performers doing artificial tricks. They're going to see what a beluga whale does when she's given the opportunity to do what she wants to do. And to me, and to all of us, I mean, that's a real education. That's authentic. And we're going to build on that.
Thank you.
Well, I think that about does it for the amount of time that we have. So thank you so much again, Dr. Marino, for giving us a talk today and sharing your work. It's very interesting, and I such a great topic, and I just can't thank you for the amount of work that you do, and for bringing awareness to such incredible creatures. So on behalf of UWindsor Anthrozoology, we would like to present you with a $500 donation to the whale sanctuary. So Dr. Daly and I will be in contact with you, and we'll get that all squared away. But thank you so much again.
Thank you so very much. That's so generous and kind of you. And thank you for the invitation. And I hope to see you all. I hope you all stay well. I hope to see you all in the future in person. Thank you, Riley, for inviting me. Thank you very much.
And is there any social medias or websites that we can check out?
Yeah, whalesanctuary.org.
Okay. And do you have a Facebook or Instagram account?
I have a Facebook account. A personal one as well as Whale Sanctuary.
Perfect.
Facebook. And they can always email me. You have my email address, and you can give it to any students or anyone who's interested in asking more questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It was such a great talk. Thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Have a good night. And
Thanks for putting on this event. Thank you so much for putting on this event, Riley.
anytime. Hopefully we'll get a chance to do some more. So stay tuned. And with that, we'll leave. So take care, everyone.
Riley, well done.
Thank you.
Well done. Was that